The derivatives market are global, and trying to get efficient global derivatives markets should be a priority, I think, of this committee. And in order to meet that goal, our regulators have got to fully understand how Europe and Asia are going to implement derivatives reform and sort of do things in concert here and not end up with incompatible guidance and rules that could harm our competitive position of our companies and the liquidity of our markets. So here's my point. As Mr. Dees outlined his testimony, while the SEC adopted a formal rule, the CFTC adopted guidance that has been subject to changes of interpretation and a resulting lawsuit also. In late May, then CFTC Chairman Mark Wetjen stated, "I don't think it was the right decision," he says, "to change the guidance, and that equally comparable comprehensive regulations in Europe should allow for substituted compliance in this situation." So my question to Mr. Dees and Mr. Carfang, the businesses that use derivatives to manage their risk need certainty. They need that liquidity. They need those willing counterparties with which to trade, whether they're located here or in Europe or Asia. Do you believe that the failure to have one joint rule to govern how Title VII of Dodd-Frank will be applied outside of the United States is harming the ability of end users to manage their risk?
Sure. Yeah, the jurisdictional issues, the conflict, and the inconsistencies among the various derivative regulations around the world is harming the ability of U.S. companies to basically get a handle and appropriately hedge their risk, time their risk, and frankly get visibility of those risks. You create imperfect markets. Corporate CFOs rely on the market to give signals, to give economic signals. And to the extent that those signals are muted or clouded, then corporate treasurers are more reluctant to make investments simply because they don't have the economic clarity that they need to move forward.
Mr. Dees.
Yes, sir. Thank you. There's uncertainty in several areas or potential bad outcomes from the lack of harmonization. The lack of harmonization between the CFTC and the banking regulators has created this uncertainty that we thought was clear in the bill, that end users should be exempted from having to post margin. And I indicated earlier that for the average non-financial member of the Business Roundtable in a coalition study we did, that was $269 million that represents a diversion of funds that would otherwise be used for business investment. The other element of, and the European regulators have been much more clear that they view the derivatives activity by end user companies as actually risk reducing, and so they have they appear not only to be exempting end users from having to post margin, but from exempting the bank counterparties to a derivative end user from having to retain a higher capital level against that derivative exposure because of the risk reducing nature. We fear that this aspect could put American companies at a disadvantage vis-a-vis their European competitors.
I understand your point. If I could quote Michel Barnier on this, the EU Commissioner, he says, if the CFTC also gives effective equivalence to third country clearinghouses, deferring to strong and rigorous rules in jurisdictions such as the EU, we will be able to adopt equivalence decisions very soon. In other words, we will treat you as you treat us. I did want to ask Chairman Frank a question. Good to see you, Chairman. It was mentioned to me that you had discussed, you had suggested exempting smaller banks from Volcker, and as memory serves, you are not of the opinion that asset managers should be designated as SIFIs. Correct. I was going to ask you, give you the floor here, on other issues that regulators are pursuing, do you find some there that were not intended, in your view, by Dodd-Frank?
Two things. First, with regard to asset managers, to clarify, I don't think as a general rule there should be. AIG clearly should have been. I don't think insurance companies should be, but AIG got no right to complain. So it's not 100%, but the assumption would be no. My biggest problem with the regulators, frankly, is they're equating the two kinds of mortgages. I think there should be risk retention. I agree with Mr. Wilson. You keep it in the portfolio, fine, but the flip side of that has to be strong risk retention. And I am not happy with what the regulators are doing there.